A military experiment was about to begin in USSR territory. The Army was conducting ground, air, and sea operations to ensure its total secrecy. Everything seemed on track along the Soviet border when a mysterious foreign aircraft was spotted near Sakhalin Island, north of Japan. After futile attempts to establish contact with the unknown aircraft, Major Gennadiy Osipovich, aboard his Su-15 fighter, was assigned to take it down. Recent reports of U.S. recon planes scouting the zone put the USSR under alarm. It was not about to allow the secret military project to be compromised. When Major Osipovich approached the unidentified aircraft to fire warning shots, no response came from the plane. Instead, it suddenly began to climb, slowing its speed, as if it wanted to avoid contact and flee. After a moment of hesitation, fearing that the enemy airplane would escape with valuable intel, Major Osipovich was given permission to open fire and take it down no matter the cost. With an audacious maneuver, he fired 2 AA-3 air-to-air missiles. One of them exploded behind the target, damaging a crucial control line. The second one hit the aircraft in the fuselage. Major Osipovich radioed command that the enemy recon plane was destroyed, and he safely returned to base. The sky was clear, and the USSR's secrets were safe. But to Major Osipovich's disgrace, neither he nor the Russian command knew that they had just taken down a civilian aircraft, carrying more than 250 innocent people aboard. The consequences of this action would put the world on the brink of nuclear war once again. The Russians would claim it was a setup and a deliberate political provocation, while the US would condemn it as a cruel act of barbarism. Intelligence gathered later demonstrated that there was more to the story than a simple unidentified aircraft flying across Russian territory. The Korean Airlines Flight 007 incident would be considered one of the final denouements of Cold War fear before the USSR finally crumbled in 1991. On an August night in 1983, at JFK Airport in New York, 269 passengers and crew, including 62 Americans, said goodbye to their families before boarding Korean Airlines Flight 007 for Seoul, South Korea. A U.S. Congressman, Republican Larry McDonald, was also on board. After taking off from New York, the Boeing 747 jumbo jet stopped at Anchorage for a refuel on August 31st. At 4 a.m., the aircraft took off full of passengers, crew, cargo, and fuel. At 1,000 feet, KAL 007 turned to the left and began its flight heading to the west. To reach Seoul safely, KAL 007 received precise air traffic control instruction. The airplane was to fly directly to the Bethel Navigational Waypoint and follow the transoceanic track R20. They set the autopilot accordingly. For the first minutes of the flight, the aircraft made its way across the sea according to the instructions. However, as time passed, KAL 007 started to deviate slightly to the north of its planned route. With every mile passed, the airplane's real-time location and the intended course to Seoul deviated further. When KAL 007 reached the oceanic waypoint Navy at about 200 miles off the Alaskan coast, the flight was already 100 miles off track. For the captain and the rest of the crew, everything seemed normal. Yet KAL 007 slowly began to make its way through Siberia. An hour later into the flight, the airplane entered airspace heavily monitored by the USSR. Coincidence or not, a USAF Boeing RC-135 happened to be in the same area observing Soviet military activities. The Soviets were conducting a top-secret missile test at the Kura Missile Test Range. The Boeing RC-135 was the military model of the civilian Boeing 707. From a distance, both aircraft looked similar, except the RC-135 was equipped with listening devices and equipment explicitly tailored for reconnaissance missions. When KAL-007 entered the zone, the USAF Boeing RC-135 was flying in wide circles in the Kamchatka Peninsula, where the USSR had installed military radars to track any activities in the Bering Sea. The USAF flight was continually coming in and out of Soviet radar range to track and monitor its communications. During one of these maneuvers, KAL-007 entered the Soviet radar range zone while the USAF's recon plane was coming out. From this moment on, KAL-007 began to be tracked and hunted by Soviet radar operators. They erroneously believed that that aircraft was the U.S. Air Force Boeing 707 they had been monitoring for several hours. For the crew and passengers aboard KAL-007, the flight was running smoothly. They were on schedule, and as far as they knew, they were on course. It was night outside, and although the sky was clear, everything was dark below them. 2 hours into the flight, the passengers were awakened by a crew member who told them over the intercom that they would arrive on time to Seoul. His last words were, quote, "Before landing, we will be serving beverages and breakfast. Thank you." But there would be no landing. In the meantime, the USSR dispatched 4 MiG-23 fighters to intercept KAL-007. The Soviet aircraft initiated a pursuit through the region that ended without contact. They had to return to base for refueling. Miraculously, KAL-007 made its way to the Sea of Okhotsk. They stayed relatively safe in these international waters until it headed again into Soviet territory near Sakhalin Island, a 500-mile-long archipelago at the north of Japan. KAL-007 had now deviated from its destination by more than 200 miles. Russian officials from the Dolinsk-Sokol airbase dispatched 2 Sukhoi Su-15 fighter jets to contact the unidentified aircraft. Gennadiy Osipovich was one of the 2 Soviet pilots. Recalling what happened that day, he told CNN in 1998 that when he approached KAL-007, quote, "I could see 2 rows of windows which were lit up. I wondered if it was a civilian aircraft. Military cargo planes don't have such windows." He doubted if it was the USAF's recon plane, but said, quote, "I wondered what kind of plane it was, but I had no time to think. I had a job to do. I started to signal the captain in international code. I informed him that he had violated our airspace. He did not respond. Along with him, the other Soviet pilot, Lieutenant General Valentin Voronikov, fired warning shots with lit tracers. Still, the crew from KAL-007 ignored the message or did not see them. Osipovich thought that was strange. They did not respond to any of the 2 warnings. He tried to make radio contact with the aircraft, but no one answered. It was their third and last opportunity to respond, and they refused to do so. Suddenly, KAL-007 began to ascend. According to the conversation the crew had with Tokyo Area Control Center, the move was apparently for fuel purposes. However, the 2 Soviet pilots behind the aircraft took this as an act of defiance. Meanwhile, Russian command debated if the plane was indeed an enemy or not. Some officers wished to wait until the airplane was adequately identified, but others urged command to take it down immediately. They believed the plane could not be civilian because it purposely flew over Russian airspace on repeated occasions and failed to respond to warning shots. It could only be a spy plane. Seconds later, command took a desperate decision and radioed Osipovich, ordering him to, quote, "destroy the intruder." And Osipovich did so without hesitation. He fired 2 air-to-air missiles before KAL-007 made it into international airspace again. Osipovich would conclude the interview with CNN by saying, quote, "My orders were to destroy the intruder. I fulfilled my mission." KAL-007 was able to fly for 15 minutes after it was hit by the Soviet aircraft. The airplane crashed in the sea, near Monoran Island, west of Sakhalin. When the news reached the U.S., President Reagan called the attack, quote, "a savagery, an act worthy of barbarians, and a crime against humanity." On September 5th, President Reagan addressed the country and played an intercepted audio tape of Osipovich's discussions with Russian officials, including a portion where Osipovich mentioned the airplane's blinking light. According to an article by Tom Patterson and published by CNN, Reagan said, quote, "A Boeing 747 airliner is a distinctive shape. It looks nothing like a U.S. military spy plane. There's no way a pilot could mistake this for anything other than a civilian airliner." The Soviets refused to acknowledge shooting down the aircraft until September 6th. Soviet Secretary General Yuri Andropov accused the U.S. of a political setup. Quote, "A sophisticated provocation masterminded by the U.S. Special Services with the use of a South Korean plane." Soviet interference continued during the search and recovery efforts, as naval forces harassed the international mission to find the crash site. No passengers were recovered in the first days after the incident, and to many, it seemed like the Soviets were eager to keep it that way. It was not until wreckage began washing up in Japan 8 days later that the Soviet conspiracy theories began falling apart. After the USSR's fall, Boris Yeltsin, Russia's new president, released Kremlin documents related to KAL-007 in 1992. He provided the airplane's black boxes that Russian officials recovered from the crash, giving the public more knowledge about what truly happened. Despite the Soviet fighter pilot reports, there was little to confirm that the Soviets actually tried to contact KAL-007 or that they even fired warning shots. Intercepted radio traffic also seemed to suggest that the Soviet fighters were instructed to shoot the plane down, even if it was over neutral waters. Regarding the strange and erroneous flight route, studies conducted later by the International Civil Aviation Organization concluded that it was an autopilot error. Although the crew was experienced, when they set the autopilot mode, it was probably in heading mode. According to author Asaf Dagani, a former NASA expert, such a setting prompted the plane to, quote, "follow a course according to the magnetic compass, which can vary in accuracy up to 15 degrees at high altitudes." A Soviet defector also provided information outlining many embarrassing command and control errors that likely led to the botched Soviet response to the civilian airliner incursion. A major Soviet radar installation had been out of service for several days, allowing KAL-007 to reach Soviet airspace without being noticed earlier. The initial pursuit's failure ratcheted up pressure on the second Soviet pilot's dispatch to identify the plane. Later interviews suggest that the pilots did believe KAL-007 could have been civilian, and even saw its windows. They did not communicate this to the ground controllers. A 1993 Russian report eventually revealed that KAL-007 was likely shot down in international airspace before it crashed in Soviet territorial waters.